It's Ross Pollard and his bare facts. So bad, so bad. It's Ross Pollard with the bare facts.
We're back with the Bare Facts podcast with a guest we had a few weeks ago by the name of Jason Duggan, Jigga, known to his colleagues and his friends, Bronze Star Medal winner, but also all-round good guy and a born leader, I'm told, by many of his colleagues. Jason, welcome back.
Thank you, Roscoe.
I want to talk a little bit more to you about Afghanistan, and we'll start. It's not a very happy topic, but it does happen, and I think it made you realise how dangerous it is what you're doing. Can you tell me what happened when you came back from your first tour and some news that you got?
Yeah, not long after I got back from the first tour, about May of 2007, I think it was. I got the news that one of our fellow American Chinook crews were shot down in Helmand province, not too far away from where we regularly were operating throughout the previous 6 months or so that I was there, which is obviously very sad given we knew the guys really well, flying joint missions with them quite a lot. So they had 7 people on board that all died that particular day. There was a bit of conjecture as to how they got shot down, whether it was RPGs or rocket propelled grenades, whether it was surface-to-air missiles. But the result, unfortunately, was the same regardless, and that was that they all perished that day or that night in Afghanistan there. So that brought it back home, how real it could have been or how lucky we were, whichever way you want to look at it. And sad that we knew, personally some of the guys that didn't make it home.
So you said when we spoke a couple of weeks ago that when you dropped crews off, you certainly felt as if they had a far more perilous situation ahead of them because they were on the ground in amongst it. Did this situation sort of bring home to you the fact that you may not be as close to the ground as the infantry or the other people going in, but there is still that risk there for you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can't deny that that's the realism, and, having it touch so close to home, reminded me, albeit I was back in Australia at that point, but already knew that I was going back the following year to Afghanistan. So, it was a reality check and a real life reminder of how real it is. It's not just someone that you heard about when you could actually put a name and a face to and a memory to the people that perished. It was it was a lot closer to home, a lot more real. So,
and then what happened when you did return with the media crew? I believe you had another confirmation of how dangerous the flying was that you were doing.
No, it was actually just before we left that same tour. So okay. Start of 2007, I'm guessing it was. Yep. There was a whole media contingent that was being flown around or operating around Afghanistan, looking at different bits and pieces. And one particular day we had the job of flying them from Kandahar to somewhere else. I can't really remember where it was. And upon reviewing the film footage when we got back, one of the cameramen picked up that there was an object that flew fairly close to the back of the helicopter, and I guess some further, I won't call it analysis, further of a review revealed that probably had an RPG or something similar that flew quite close to us, and could have been a different situation, but we were none the wiser and wouldn't have known about it if there hadn't been a camera crew on board. But it was once again a little reality check of, okay, they're not waving to say hello all the time. There's other people that not necessarily happy for us to be there and do what they can to make sure we leave. So
was that a cumulative thing for you? Like, obviously with the film crew and catching the footage afterwards, was it also then with losing close colleagues, was it a cumulative thing for you? Did you become more and more conscious each time you flew, or?
No, not that I recall. Once again, I sort of just took every day as it came. Just do what you can, put the aircraft in the best spot to make sure that you're as small a target as you can be, or as a target for the least period of time that you can be, and then roll the punches after that. And as I said, I was quite lucky. Very fortunate to have got through unscathed on both of my tours there. We had aircraft in our formations or in around the area of operations that were hit by all sorts of different things, from small arms fire onwards. And yeah, as I said, I was just lucky. We had a lot of stories that haven't necessarily got back to Australia, but Australian crews that were exposed to, heavy machine gun fire and other bits and pieces, but just got on and did their job, and no fanfare wanted nor necessarily received in many cases, because it was all part of the job. And like I said, we were just one small part of a bigger organisation, and weren't doing anything for any particular recognition, just doing the job.
So we see in the media, we see awards from time to time for people in different parts of the armed forces. I remember watching a documentary a long time ago about SAS soldiers in the 80s, and one of them made a comment. He said there's many, many heroic acts that take place but are never recognised. That's just how it is. That's just what you guys do, as you say. Is there ever any time where it is nice to get recognition, or that you don't join the job for the recognition?
I can't speak for everyone, but It's not why I was doing what I was doing. And I think if you spent your time trying to do something heroic, you'd probably get yourself in trouble if you're just there trying to look after your mates and do your job, and whatever transpires. Then if you are recognised, that'd be great. But I think if you talk to most guys and girls in the Defence Force, they're not there to try and get accolades and otherwise. If it's always nice if they come, but there's probably just as many people like myself that don't necessarily want that recognition, because I was just doing my job. Wasn't there to do anything special.
So I'm just going to put you on the spot here a little bit. I've spoken to a number of your colleagues, and one of your qualities that stands out to all of them is your leadership style. What does leadership mean to you?
Thanks, Roscoe. Yeah. Look, for me, it's a subconscious act. I am who I am. But if I was to give you my definition of what leadership is, it can't be pigeonholed into one particular action or character trait. I think it's very situational, depending on what it is and where you're doing. It's having the ability to read your crowd, read the people you're with, working with and for, always trying to do your best and best for your people. I think that always holds you in good stead, because even when things don't go well, guys and girls know that you're, have been doing the best you can to lead and get them through situations, or through, it doesn't have to be war, it can be just life, day-to-day routines and other bits and pieces. Never set yourself above anyone else. Don't think you're any better than the people you work with or for.
So how do you get people to follow you? What is it? Is it by leading by example? Is that
absolutely? That's the easiest thing you can do. I think if you expect people to do a certain thing or act a certain way, then the easiest thing you can do is set that example for the people around you. And if you always maintain as high a standard as you can of yourself, then by default demand it of the people that work with you, and try and get them to aspire to the same, levels of professionalism or levels of achievement, then you're a long way along the road of getting a good cohesive unit to achieve good things and great things.
What about the hard parts of leadership, say disciplining people or having a word to people when they're not up to scratch? How do you approach that?
Just honest and forthright. Don't let things Don't dwell on them. Don't let them go too long. Try and nip them in the bud early, and a small, quick intervention early as things are going awry is a lot better than having to have a bigger, larger conversation that's got more dire consequences, or not dire, but worse consequences as time transpires.
So a leadership issue or a management issue that you have, say, in an administrative role, how does that change, say, when you have to show leadership or snap someone into line, either in the field of battle or, say, when you're working as an air ambulance pilot, sorry?
Yeah, no, I'm not good enough to be a paramedic, mate. I don't consciously treat them any differently, and that goes back to just trying to do the best that you can all the time, no matter where you are and what you're doing. There's things that have a timeliness associated with it, where you can't let things go longer than you need to, and they need to be addressed to achieve, a certain part of the flight or a certain part of the job on. So you need to correct the situation sooner rather than later. Other things can wait till you get back, and it's part of a debrief or in preparation for the next task you're doing. So, okay, well, this is what we encountered last time. Didn't go so well for whatever reasons. Let's fix it. Let's do this and move on.
Have you had situations in any of your tours, say particularly Afghanistan, where you've had to support people that are not handling the pressure?
Yes, yeah. Happened a few times directly and indirectly. And the best way to do that is, once again, to be honest with the guys and girls, but also trying to have that trust from them to start with, so they're more forthcoming when things aren't going as well for them as could be. And then doing the best to assist them to get through whatever it is that's going on. And that can be just discussions, talks, how's the weather? How's this? It can be more directed as to what is causing the issues, and putting yourself, but also realising sometimes you may not be the person that is best placed to do it. So, use the crew, use the overall team to assist the individual to try and get through whatever's going on.
Where does humour come into leadership?
Day to day, I think the more you can interject and show elements of realism in your personality and be as natural as you can, I think definitely holds you in good stead, but also icebreaker, intentional or otherwise. It's good to sort of have that ability to relax yourself and the people around you by use of humour. I'm by no means a comedian, that's for sure.
Can you tell us a little bit, or briefly, for the layperson about CRM or crew resource management and why it's so important in, say, an aviation environment?
Yeah, so it's a term that was sort of coined, I think, back in the 90s, but it's, like a lot of the modern words that people come up with, it's just either formalising or calling something a name that was being done naturally in many situations and used to either educate people or at least narrow down elements of an operation or a work practice to try and to help those that may not be as informed or not act in certain ways. So crew resource management, simply put in my mind, is the ability to communicate with the people immediately closest to you, but also in the wider environment. That, from an aviation point of view, can be your crew on board, so pilot, co-pilot, crewman or loadmaster, but also, through the paramedics I've flown with in time, can be talking to the engineers, air traffic control. It's just a way you communicate to ensure that depending on what's going on, you're getting the best out of yourselves, the immediate crew, and also the wider organisation that's in support of whatever it is you're doing. It's a technique or a process which has been expanded out of aviation. I know that anaesthetists and a lot of theatre staff have had some form of that training over time, and to try and, once again, get the best out of some stressful situations by managing the people, communicating appropriately for the time, and achieving the best results possible.
I've certainly noticed and been told that the medical fraternity have certainly taken on what you guys do in aviation a lot now with checklists.
Yep.
And checklists for every situation, whether you're relaxed or not, but also surgical teams will often introduce themselves to each other. So it certainly has taken on a big thing. And I know now paramedics use checklists before procedures, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that the more stressful the work, the more dynamic it is. To be able to fall back on a known, being a checklist just makes things a lot easier when your head's dealing with 1,000 different things. If you can go back to a set routine, then you've got a better chance of not forgetting something that might be critical to the outcome. In your case, a patient. In my case, aircraft emergency.
Is it? Would you say it's almost establishing a safe baseline? So I know that in previous podcasts, Sean Whitmore spoke about that. Like if you practice and you're at a certain level, then when it does get stressful, you can just subconsciously refer back.
Absolutely.
To that.
That's the simplest way of doing it, and having those routines, whether it's an established checklist or a set routine that you follow or you've been educated to follow, will help you fall back on those when your mental capacity is decreased and situational awareness is reduced for whatever it might be. I try and do the same thing at 10 o'clock in the morning as I do at 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm flying, or 10 o'clock at night if it's dark. I follow a set routine so that when I'm distracted or when I'm otherwise occupied, I still naturally fall back into these checklist routines and patterns, and are less likely to actually forget something.
So when you work at Air Ambulance, there's not an unwritten rule, but certainly a code that a paramedic will receive a request and then come to you, and they don't give you any details of what the job is apart from, can you get from point A to point B and then back to point C?
That's it.
So obviously that's to not put any undue pressure on you with the nature of the job.
Completely, yeah. So, we're all emotional beasts one way or another. To avoid any situations where people are pushing a situation they don't necessarily have to, we try and remove the medical need out of that question or that tasking. Like exactly as you said, can you fly to here? Yes or no? And that's as simple as the answer needs to be from a pilot's point of view. It may not be a straight black and white yes or no. It might be yes with contingencies or modifications. That's the pilot or the crew's, that's what they're there to do, to make those safe aviation decisions. We're not there to make a medical decision, and if it's a splinter or a cardiac arrest, shouldn't change the I guess adherence to the rules, procedures, or otherwise. So, and that removes that emotion in that decision making, and think gives an overall safer outcome more often than not.
So you get a request, you say yes, you go to a job. Say it's a pediatric trauma. You've got your job to do, as does the crewman and the paramedics. Does it ever affect you afterwards when you stop and think about what you've been to?
No, I'm pretty simple like that, Roscoe. I try and compartmentalise. I don't try. Subconsciously compartmentalise a lot of this stuff and think, well, my reflection will be, have I done everything I could do to the best of my ability? And if I can say yes to that, then that's my part done. You never want to see some of the crap and corruption that we see on the side of a road or otherwise, because generally it's, result of a bad situation and people are hurt in one way, shape or form. But my role is to assist good people like yourselves to provide that medical assistance to those in need and get them to a higher level of care in a better shape than they were before we arrived. And that's what I focus on.
Is the teamwork that you see at Air Ambulance, is it similar to what you had when you worked in the military?
Yeah, it is. It's similar, and obviously it's got its unique characteristics. It's teams within teams, and then once you get onto the ground, that there's a broader scope of assistance when we start talking about SES, CFA, other ambulance personnel on the ground. It's a really dynamic and excellent environment to be part of and see it, especially on some of the bigger jobs, how it all unfolds, and playing my small little part in it. I really enjoy it. That's what's kept me motivated for the last 14 odd years since I left the Army, and enjoyed every second of it.
What's the main difference between flying in the military and then flying air ambulance? I mean, obviously apart from not being shot at, although there are some suburbs in Melbourne where that...
Depends what your task is.
Yeah.
That could be worse.
Is there a huge difference for you, or not particularly?
No, once again, it's about that, playing my role as part of the bigger team and the bigger wheel turns. So different type of environment, flying around in the Army, at lower levels, and the challenges and threats might be the terrain as well as someone who doesn't want you to be there, compared to air ambulance flying up into the mountains in the middle of winter and facing icing, snow, freezing rain, and small little holes in the trees in a small little crew, having never been there and done a significant amount of reconnaissance for it. So that in itself is challenging and exciting. I've never been bored since.
Anything you don't like about flying?
Paperwork. Sometimes, especially from a training perspective, sometimes I think if the weight of the paperwork at the end of a flight doesn't equal the amount of fuel you've burnt, then you haven't done it properly. But no, I feel that I've had a pretty fortunate career to be doing what I'm doing. Hence, I'm still doing it now and not looking for anything else. So I think that's always a good sign. I don't know. I've got a philosophy: spend good money on a mattress because you spend about a third of your life in bed, give or take. Get a job you love because you spend,
you do spend a long time
doing it. So why not? And I've been lucky that I've got that sorted.
How exhausting is it flying with night vision goggles on? Can you tell us about how much extra weight you have on your head with them, and how much vision do you have?
Yeah, field of view is roughly 40 degrees. So I think I've described it previous as like looking through toilet roll holders, and to gain a good amount of information, especially when you're closer to the ground, then you need to move your head quite a lot, up and down, left and right, depending on what it is you're exposed to. It's about 1.5 kilos of extra weight on your head, and depending on how you've got it balanced or otherwise, that's where the fatigue comes in, both eye strain because you're working quite hard, especially as you're learning to use them, but then the physical strain of carrying that extra weight on your head, depending on how you're seated, where your head sits in relation to your body, then you've got a weight hanging forward on your neck. So that does get tiring at different times. Like most things, you get match fit. So if you're doing it a lot, then your body gets more used to it. Your eyes get more used to getting the information and don't get as tired. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
It does. How exhausting is it for you to do a night winch with night vision goggles on?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
If you want to learn how to be extraordinary and achieve high success and a winning mindset, comment on this episode, Ice Bath, at the Barefax Podcast on YouTube or at the Barefax Podcast on Instagram, and I'll give you instant access to my latest ebook, The Top 10 Benefits of Ice Baths for Extraordinary Results. Tip 5 is my personal favourite. Let me know what your top tip is.
It's in the setup. I go back to those routines and checklists. So it can be in I call it the wrong environment. You're working like a cut snake to try and hold the aircraft steady so I'm not bashing you into a rock or a tree or whatever else. If we have the time and the situation works out well, you've got good hover references and whatever else, it's not as difficult. So it's really situational. The side of a cliff, if the wind's coming from the wrong way and forces you to orientate in a particular way, which, affords you a better position to get the paramedic on the ground, but, provides a harder location for me to work to keep the aircraft steady, then my workload increases. But we spend a lot of time as a crew, as you've seen, to try and to minimise that risk as best we can by spending that little bit of extra time in the setup. Make sure that if I can see something, then I can hold the aircraft steadier, which decreases the workload for the crewman, which increases the safety for the paramedic and the patient who are going up and down on the wire.
The winch position or the hover position is the most dangerous position for the aircraft, yes?
Yeah, in most cases. And the reason is most helicopters won't fly with one engine only. So that's the difficulty, is trying to balance where's the risk really at. Is it risk of an engine failure? Is it the risk of hitting a tree? Is it the risk of putting the paramedic, into a tree or rock or somewhere they don't want to be? So it's a balance of all of that. And every situation is different, which is why it's one of the most challenging things we do, but also one of the most rewarding when it's all said and done.
So if a fixed wing aircraft, a plane, loses both engines, they
can glide. Yep. The helicopter equivalent's called autorotation. So,
and how effective is that?
If you stood on your roof and threw a rock off, it's very similar. No, it's not.
Okay.
No. Look, it's got the advantage that a helicopter has over a plane is that in the right circumstances, we can slow our forward movement before we hit the ground. So you're probably dealing with a vertical landing, which got seats and other bits and pieces that'll hopefully, and wheels that'll soak up some of that impact.
Yeah.
Whereas a plane is coming down at a minimum speed, depending on what the plane is, and they're going to hit the ground or a tree or whatever else at a considerable forward speed. So just like all the car crashes that we see in and around the country, that's the difference. So in many ways, we're better off in a helicopter.
Okay. With
the right amount of time and whatever else.
Speaking of dangers, we spoke about it a little bit earlier. You had some ammunition fly into the compound not far from you when you came out of a meeting. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, I forgot about that. I think it was the first time I was over in Afghanistan. So the Taliban or insurgents, those who didn't want us there, had a ready supply of these old 107mm rockets that they would occasionally set up around a lot of different places, but in Kandahar where we were, you'd routinely get the air raid alarm would go off, and you'd have to move towards some bunkers and wait and see, and hopefully the rockets hadn't flown into the compound, or if they had, they'd landed somewhere where it didn't matter so much.
So just on that, they fire them at you. How do you get a warning? Are there sensors?
There'd be sensors that the air defence people would have. I don't really know whether it's however they pick it up, but it's reasonably reliable.
Yep.
It doesn't tell you exactly where it's going. It's more of a, hey, it's coming. It's too late. It's already here. It's more that the first one's arrived and maybe there's another one coming. So go and stick yourself in a bunker and play some cards for a while. Who knows? But one particular evening, we used to have a meeting, get everyone together, and it was usually right before dinner. So this particular evening, we just finished and dispersed for walking off towards dinner, and I just heard this sort of sound and looked up, and there's this sort of fireball the size of a football flying over our heads.
How close? Far over your heads?
A few metres away.
Jesus.
And you sort of naturally just followed it with my eyes, thinking, okay, wow. And then that landed right in our compound with a big explosion, which was only 100 metres behind me at that stage. So we ran back.
Can you feel the force of that from that distance?
Yeah, nothing extreme.
Okay.
You definitely feel the percussion of it all. And so ran back to the compound. The rocket had landed right where we'd all been only minutes prior. Fortunately, because it was dinner and everyone was hungry, that pretty well everyone had gone at that stage. So there was no injuries or anything like that, but it made a fair mess. The shrapnel passed through quite a few of our accommodation buildings, looking a little bit like Swiss cheese, which, in typical fashion, the immediate fix is go and get some 100-mile-an-hour tape, patch up the holes and keep the heat in and crack on. Well, I went back, 6 months later or whatever it was, straight back and into the same room I was previously. And one of my very good friends. Well, I just didn't think so at the time anyway. I was in my room one night and I heard this sticky tape peel back, and then suddenly my room's filling with cigar smoke. And my idiot friend decided that he would introduce me to some of his cigar fumes. He quickly just patched up the tape, and I walked outside. He's giggling like a school kid, thinking he's very funny. But they're the sort of things that help you get through it and make light of the situation.
What do you do with your downtime in the compounds over there?
Look, they were fairly well equipped by the time we had got there for both times, so it was continuing to develop. There was gyms for people to go and work out. Had a few, you could walk around, use, certain little rules and procedures, but, you could get some exercise there. There was TVs. That was, 15 or 16 years ago now, so I think a lot of people would be able to, use Skype or whatever back to home, so people would be able to maintain their relationships via the internet in that regard. Now there was computers for people to use. It was fairly well equipped from that sort of get away from work environment.
You've worked with the Special Forces before. So there's not a cloak of secrecy, but certainly the higher end Special Forces are very removed or very secretive, and obviously identities and stuff are protected, particularly with civilians. How does that work with you guys? Is there a different dynamic with you with some of the Special Forces, or not really? Or
no, not really. In the sense, when we're working with them, we just did our part of the job. So we'd get involved I did, a lot of the planning and helping out from that coordination. So you had a direct relationship with the guys you're working with. There was no, they'd operate out of their compounds. We'd come together to work, and then both organisations would go off and do their thing. We were, utmost respect for what they did and what they were exposed to. For all the stuff that I saw was excellent. I had no issues, and I said nothing but respect for where they were, what they did, and
they could spend very long periods of time, couldn't they, in very, very harsh environments?
Yeah, exactly. So depending on what their roles were and what job they were doing on any given day, then they'd be gone for long periods of time in pretty adverse environments. And my hat's off to them. Better than me.
So we're at Babcock.
Yep.
Now you're in a training role. How many shifts do you get back to do at Air Ambulance on the line?
Depends on the overall workload. So sometimes less than I'd like, but always thoroughly enjoy it when I do get back onto shift. Try and get away from the computer. Never seem to get away from the phone, which I'm sure everyone will tell you about. But it's great. Just phone rings. Often do a job with crewman and paramedic and into it.
When's the expiry date for flying?
No date set yet. Whenever I've had enough, I guess, but I don't see that coming anytime soon. Don't really fancy getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning too often. If I didn't do too many post-midnight night shifts, I'd be pretty happy if we could arrange that. But I think I'm not the only Lone Ranger on that front.
Is there legislation as to a certain age where someone does have to stop flying, or is it more to do with medical and physical?
It's mainly passing a CASA-approved medical on a regular basis. There's, depending on your age, there's different requirements. I'm not quite there despite my appearance, Roscoe. Thank you.
I didn't say anything.
So as long as you can stay fit and able, I suspect that'll change in time for post-60 type age groups, but at the moment there's no distinct.
So you're still 30 years off, is that right?
Absolutely.
Off the 60-year one? Yep.
As long as I can keep borrowing someone else's birth certificate, it should be fine.
Jigga, thanks for coming back again. We had an overwhelming response from your first one. we're getting there with getting some information out of you, and hopefully maybe in the future we might be able to knock that humility out of you, but that's probably what makes you such a good person. Thanks for your time again today. We really appreciate it, and all the best.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks for listening today. We're glad you could join us. For more information on today's episode, previous episodes and upcoming episodes, please go to @the Podcast on Instagram. Also our YouTube channel, The Facts Podcast with Ross Pollard, as well as Facebook, The Facts. And please get in contact with us. If you are an extraordinary person, you know an extraordinary person, or you've been in an extraordinary situation.